I shouldn't have let him get that close, but by the time I realized it, his breath was already on my neck. It started with something harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. My husband's brother, Leon, had always been charming in a way that felt effortless. Like he didn't have to try. He had this habit of standing too close when he talked, his eyes lingering just a second longer than they should. It was subtle, so subtle that I convinced myself it was nothing until at night. The house was quiet, my husband out on a business trip, leaving just me and Leon in the dimly lit living room. Had come over to drop off something my husband had forgotten, just an excuse. I was sure of it. No, you look lonely, he murmured, leaning against the counter as I poured myself a glass of wine. His voice was too smooth, too familiar. I forced a laugh. I'm fine, Jester. Then why do you look like you need company? That's when I felt it, his presence behind me, closer than it should have been. My body tensed, my fingers tightening around the glass as his warmth pressed near. This wasn't right, but I didn't move. His hand brushed my arm, slow, deliberate. I should have stepped away. I should have said something instead. It stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, and then in a voice so quiet it almost didn't exist, he asked, do you want me to stop? I should have said yes, but I didn't. I should have said yes. I should have turned around, put space between us, reminded him who we were to each other, but I didn't. I froze, my grip tightening garland the stem of my wine glass. His voice lingered in the air, waiting, no daring me tones, or my breathing was uneven, my pulse steady, heavy thump against my skin. A very nerve in my body was on high alert, sensing his warmth behind me, his presence like a shadow pressing into mine. Leon, my voice was barely a whisper, unstand, lost somewhere between reassurance, temptation. He didn't move away. If anything, he came closer, his breath skimmed the back of my neck, and a slow knowing chuckle vibrated from his stew. Didn't answer, he murmured, his fingers trailing lightly down my arm. That tells me everything. I swallowed, heard my throat dry. This was wrong, this was dangerous, but my body betrayed, locked in place, unwilling to break the tension hanging between us. His fingers reached my wrist, and that's when I infinitely moved, pulling away as I tried to face him. His eyes dark and unread black edged onto me. There was something in them, something bold, something reckless. I could have pushed him away. I could have told him to leave instead. Whispered, you shouldn't be doing this, he smirked. But you don't really want me to stop, do you? The audacity of his words sent a jolt through me, and I hated how much they rattled me. Leon had always been flirtatious, the kind of man who knew his effect on women, but I wasn't just any woman. I was his brother's wife, and yeah, they wasn't wrong. I wanted to deny it, to push back, to hold on to the boundaries that were already beginning to blur, but then he reached out again, his fingers grazing my waist, his touch so faint it was almost imaginary. You see the way you look at me, he continued, his voice impossibly soft, the way you hesitate like you're waiting for an excuse. I stepped back, but he followed it. This is insane, I muttered, shaking my head. You need to go, his smirk went in. Do you really want that? My silence was my answer. Leon took another step, backing me up against that counter. His hands rested lightly on the edge beside me, caging me in without aching me. His body was close to me. Breath caught in my throat as I looked up at him. What are you so afraid of? He asked, tilting his head slightly. I opened my mouth, ready to say everything, but before I could, the front door rattled. My husband. Panic shot through me like lightning. My hands pushed against Leon's chest as I darted to the other side, off the kitchen, putting distance between us. Just as the lock turned and the door cracked open, Leon didn't move. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even pretend. He just smirked, his eyes still locked on. Then as my husband stepped inside, what's going on? My husband asked, at his gaze flicking between us. I felt Mr. stomach twist. Did he see something? Did he notice the way I looked, flushed and nervous, breathless? Leon was the one Hone's word first. I was just keeping her company. His words held weight, a double meaning only understood. I forced a smile, my heart still hammering. Yeah, just talking. My husband nodded, oblivious, but Leon knew the truth, and the worst part. So did I. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Leon's breath against my skin, his voice echoing in my head. Do you really want me to stop? His words weren't just a question, they were a challenge. I turned onto my side, staring at the man beside me, my husband. He was sound asleep, his breathing steady, peaceful, completely unaware, but he wasn't. I still felt the weight of Leon's gaze, the way his presence had lingered even after my husband walked and hadn't. Panic, he didn't step away like Eamon caught doing something wrong, because he knew I wouldn't expose him. He knew I'd stay quiet, because what would even say that his brother had come too close, that his touch had lingered longer than it should have, that for a brief, terrifying moment I hadn't wanted him to stop. I squeezed my eyes shut, frustration twisting in my chest. This was a mistake. It could happen again, but deep down a part of me wasn't sure if that was the truth or just something I needed to believe morning came too soon. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but I was already awake, running on. Restless thoughts and regret. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. I stiffened. Number it couldn't be, but it was. Leon strolled in like he belonged here, like nothing had happened last night. My husband H-band was in the shower, oblivious to the fact that his brother had just walked in. Good morning, Leon greeted, his voice casual. I turned sharply, my hands tightening around the counter. What are you doing here? He smirked, that same damn smirk, the one that told me he wasn't sorry, the one that told me he was enjoying this. Relax, he said, grabbing an apple from the counter and taking a bite. Just came to see my brother. I folded my arms, trying to ignore the way my pulse had already picked up. He's upstairs. Leon didn't move, instead high size trailed over me, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing me. Did you sleep well? He asked. I exhaled sharply. Leon, I didn't. His voice was quieter now, his tone shifting darker. I should have walked away. Should have called my husband down. It should have done anything but stand there and let him close the distance between us. I couldn't stop thinking about last night, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I sucked in a breath. Nothing happened. He leaned in his lips, inches from my ear. But you wanted Dito. My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I stepped back, shaking my head. Do you need to leave? Leon exhaled, a soft laugh, running a hand through his hair. Why are you so afraid to admit it? My jaw tightened. Because it's wrong. His smirk faded just slightly. Then tell me you don't feel. I'd open my mouth to lie, to deny, to push him away for good. But before I could, my husband's voice called from upstairs. Babe, who's at the door? I turned it instantly, stepping away from Leon. Like he'd been burned, my pulse raced, guilt crawling up my throat like a noose tightening around my neck. Leon chuckled under his breath, biting into his apple again before tossing it onto the counter. See you around. And just like that, he was gone. But the damage had already been done, because he was right. I did feel Aiden, no matter how much I denied it. He wasn't sure if I wanted it to stop. I hated how my hands were shaking. It gripped the edge of the counter, forcing myself to breathe. This couldn't happen again. But deep down I knew the truth. It already had. Leon wasn't just testing boundaries anymore, he was shattering them. And the worst part, I let him. Footsteps on the stairs made me snap out of my thoughts. My husband walked into the kitchen, rubbing back of his head. Was that Leon? And nodded, forcing my voice to stay. Vania. He just stopped by to see you, he said, grabbing a coffee mug. He's been acting strange lately, don't you think? I swallowed hard. Strange how he shrugged. I didn't know he's been around a lot, Maureen. Sometimes I catch him looking at you, chuckled, shaking his head. Not that I blame him. You're beautiful. My stomach twisted. He knew Lon was looking at me, but he had no idea what had already happened. I forced a smile, but my heart was pounding. You're imagining things, he hummed, sipping his coffee. Maybe. Then he glanced at his watch. I have to leave early today. Got a long shift. Yuck. Be okay. Alone. In Odette quickly. Yeah, of course. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek before grabbing his keys and heading out. The skin, the door shut behind him. I let out a shaky breath, pressing my palms against the counter. This is your chance. Seen it now. I reached for my phone and pulled up Leon's number. My finger hovered over the screen before finally typing. Me, this needs to stop. Don't come here, Regan. I stared at the message, my phone lingering over the send button. One press, that was all it took to end this. Before it got worse, I pressed send. Seconds passed, then minutes, no response. Maybe got the message, maybe this was finally over. But then a knock at the door. My breath caught. Number. I hesitated, me heart slammed against my ribs. Maybe it was a delivery, maybe it was a neighbor, maybe it wasn't him. I moved to the door, hesitating before opening it. Leon stood there, unbothered, and music, completely ignoring my warning. I thought he made myself clear, I whispered. Has smirked. You did. He stepped instead of closing the door behind him. He wasn't asking for permission. I stepped back. Then why are you here? He exhaled, studying me, not with arrogance this time, with something else, something deeper. Yodel me, he murmured. Froze. Because if you really wanted me gone, he took another step. You wouldn't have opened the door. My breath shuddered. He was right. I could have locked it. I could have ignored him, but I didn't, and no, he wasn't sure if I would stop him. I should have told him to leave. I should have slammed the door in his face, locked it, and walked away, but I didn't. Lon stood in front of me, his presence overwhelming, his gaze burning into mine like he already knew the answer before I did. He wasn't here to ask for permission. He was here because he knew I wouldn't push him away. I swallowed hard, my back pressing against the wall as he took another step inside, closing the space between us. I meant what I said, Leon. My voice barely sounded like Leon. This needs to stop. His eyes studied me, dark and unreadable, but not backing down. This stopped me, he said simply. My breath hitched. Turned my head, squeezing my eyes shut. This is wrong. His fingers traced lightly over my wrist, sending a jolt through the skin. It wasn't forceful, it wasn't demanding, it was worse, it was patient. Calculated, like he wanted me to realize I wasn't pulling away. You don't really believe that hammer mured. I did, I had to, but my body was betraying me in ways I couldn't control. Way my breath quickened the way my pulse pounded, the way his touch burned even, though it was barely there. He leaned in his lips just inches from my ear, not touching, just close enough to make me feel him. You've thought about it, haven't you? His voice was low, taunting what it would be like. It squeezed my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Leon, please, please. What his breath fanned against my skin. Please stop. I should have said yes. I should have shoved time away, but I didn't. He let the silence stretch between us, waiting, giving me time to decide, like he already knew what my answer would be. And maybe that was the worst part, because when my husband called a few minutes later, telling me he'd be home late again, I didn't tell him Leon was already here, and I didn't tell him that I hadn't stopped him. It should have stopped him. I should have stepped away, said no, ended this madness for it. Destroyed everything, but I didn't. Leon's fingers stressed over my wrist, his touch barely there, but it burned like fire. My pulse betrayed me, racing beneath his fingertips. My body was reacting before my mind could make a decision. You're shaking, he murmured, his voice dark, unreadable. Is it fear or something else? I swallowed hard. Leon, we can't do this. He exhaled, his breath brushing against my skin. But we already have. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right. This wasn't just some fleeting moment. This had been building for weeks. Long stolen glances, secret touches that lingered. 2 long words left unspoken that meant far more than they should have. The worst part, I didn't regret it. I should have been drowning in guilt, suffocated by shame, but the only thing I felt was the unbearably heat between us, the electricity gurgling in the silence. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched, stepping back. My husband's name flashed across the screen. Leon's jaw tensed. Ash watched me hesitate. The choice I should have made from the start now loomed over me like a storm. I had taught shoes. I sucked in a breath, and precedents were they, honey? Leon's eyes darkened as he spoke, as if hearing my husband's voice through the receiver reminded him of the reality we'd been so dangerously ignoring. Just checking, and my husband said, I'll be home late. You okay? I felt Leon's gaze on me, waiting, watching, daring me to tell the truth. I forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Such a simple word, a lie wrapped in politeness, because nothing about this was fine. As I hung up, Leon let out a low chuckle. You won't know him. I swallowed. I can't. His smirk faded into something deeper, something knowing, because you don't want to. It turned away, running a hand through my hair. Leon, we have to stop this. It's not just wrong, it is dangerous. He moved behind me, his warmth so close, I could feel it then. Why do y'all keep letting it happen? Silence stretched between us. Bess, he was right. I could have stopped this from the very first moment. He could have pushed him away, blocked his number, locked the door, but I didn't, and maybe I never really want head toe. Leon took one last look at me, his expression I read, then he stepped back. I'll leave, he said, finally. Relief should have washed over him, but it didn't, because as he reassured the door, he glanced over his shoulder and said, but this isn't over, and y'all know it. Then he walked out, and I was left standing there breathless, knowing that my life, my marriage would never be the same again.